Well, welcome. How are you guys today? Is everybody doing okay? Is everybody doing okay? Okay, good. I like to have a little bit of feedback. It's okay. We're in church. We can talk. It's all right. Let's do that. Let's worship God together. Let's talk to each other. My name's Carter. If we haven't met, I'm one of the pastors here at Redemption Church. I'm thankful you're with us. But I also just want to start by celebrating the two baptisms we had last week. Can we celebrate that together, that God gave us two people that took that step of obedience, Andy and Amelia? It was really exciting, really encouraging to see God do that in our midst because he uses the church to do that. And so that's one of the things that we're about here, is seeing him move and change people's lives. And we want to see that happen over and over again. Baptism is kind of that first step of obedience that you take when you put your faith in Jesus. You're making it public. You're saying, yeah, I want to commit my life to him. And so that's what it means. You take that first step, you share it with the world. So we want to be all about that here at our church. It's kind of like a wedding ceremony, if you think about it like that. You know, you might not know that first moment that you fell in love with somebody that you get married to, but you can always look back to the wedding ceremony, the marriage ceremony that you had, and think that was a meaningful moment, right? That's the moment that we started our life together. That's the moment that we committed to one another. Well, baptism is a very similar thing for believers. You might not know the exact moment you started to believe in Jesus and follow him, but you can always look back to baptism as that moment, as that ceremony, as that important symbolic gesture that you take to say, I'm committed to following him with my whole life. And so maybe there are still some of you in here that need that. I just wanted to make that pitch to you before we even get into our text today to say, listen, if you saw baptisms last week and something's stirring in you because you started following Jesus, you're not sure when, but you know that you haven't made that faith public yet, you can still talk to our prayer counselors afterward today. You can come talk to me and find me, but we would love to share more about what baptism looks like and help you take that step of obedience, okay? So that's just a freebie there for you today. Don't make excuses for it, for not being obedient. Delayed obedience is disobedience. You don't want to be disobedient to God. Now, he shows you grace, of course, in all your disobedience. But let's take that step of obedience together in baptism if that's what you need to do today, all right? Now, for the 10 of you who have been baptized at our church this year, and for the 9 of you that were baptized here last year, and really for all of us, though, you need this community of believers to help you learn what it looks like to fully follow Jesus. You need to be around other Jesus followers who can help you to be a Jesus follower. That's what we need community with one another. We can't go at it alone in any area of life, but especially when it comes to being godly, when it comes to being wise, when it comes to being a Christian and following Jesus. So today we're going to look at several verses out of Proverbs 27. If you want to turn there, find it on your Bible app. We're going to talk about guarding our relationships. And so that's actually our simple main point for today as well, is to guard your relationships, because you need other people to help you grow closer to Jesus. Now, I know that's kind of a general statement, guard your relationships, but we're going to focus on guarding who we let into our lives and who we allow to influence us. That's what we're going to talk about through these Proverbs. That's a lot of the Proverbs is wisdom around who you let influence you. So we need some guardrails for that. Remember what guardrails are. They're like, wisdom is like guardrails. They direct us on the path to life. They keep us out of the danger zone. So we need some guardrails for building these meaningful, deep relationships that are healthy and that help us grow closer to Jesus over time, because we need to know which relationships are worth cultivating, which ones we might need to let go of, which ones give us life, which ones might lead to destruction if we remain in them. We need to learn how to set up healthy boundaries and what it looks like to be a good friend and influence someone else. We need all of these things. We need to guard our relationships. And that's especially important as a follower of Jesus, because you can't be a lone Christian. It's like categorically impossible to be a lone Christian. You have to have other people pushing you closer to Jesus every day, because your natural inclination is to reject Jesus and to walk away from him. So you need other people that are goading you on. You need other people sharing the grace of the gospel with you, reminding you of who you are in Christ. The way that we say it here is discipleship happens in community. And discipleship isn't just something that somebody does for you, right? That's not what discipleship is. Discipleship is actually learning to follow Jesus better. You're a disciple of Jesus when you start following him. So in order for you to grow closer to Jesus, you have to be in community with other Jesus followers. That's just kind of how it works. I've talked about it like this before, but it's like being on a football or baseball team. You know, if you're on a football team, for example, the only way to play football is if you're on a team. You can't do that by yourself, right? I mean, maybe you can work out by yourself, maybe you can practice by yourself, and maybe you could call yourself a football player, though you're not on a football team, for a short period of time. But eventually, if you're not on a football team, then you just ain't a football player, right? Because you got, like categorically, to be a football player, you have to play on a team. That's what it looks like. And that's exactly what it means to be a Christian. You cannot be a lone Christian. It's just categorically impossible. When you become a Jesus follower, you become a Jesus follower with all the other Jesus followers across history for all time. That's what you become a part of the church. You're on the team. You can't be a lone Christian. Can't follow Jesus on your own. Once you believe in him, you're on the team called the church. So the best thing to do is to learn what that looks like and to cultivate those healthy relationships that you know will influence you to look more like Jesus over time, to grow closer to Jesus over time. You got to have brothers and sisters in the faith who are helping you follow Jesus, and they're doing that with you and around you. And you can call them the church because that's what the church is supposed to be. So you have to guard your relationships in order to make sure that you're doing that in a wise and healthy way. Now, that doesn't mean you don't hang out with non-Christians. That doesn't mean you're going to have people you're not going to have people in your life that you should be influencing. You should. We all should have people that we're influencing. But what we're talking about in these wisdom proverbs for today is who's influencing you. That's what we're talking about here. Who are you allowing into your life to influence you? The people that you're around will shape who you are. I read an article this week that said that you're about the average of the 5 closest relationships that you have. It's because the people who are around rub off on us. We just become like the people that we are around. So if you want to really get more out of the faith that you say you have, you got to be around people who can push you to that faith and who can help you grow in that faith and who can help you understand what it looks like to follow Jesus more closely. You have to guard your relationships. Does that make sense? We tracking with that? Okay, good. We talked about healthy relationships in our DTR series a few months ago, so I would highly encourage you, if you weren't here for that, you haven't listened to them, go back on our website or on our podcast, and you can follow along there and learn what those are. We talked about friendship and marriage and all these other things. But I think Proverbs is going to bring a different perspective for us today in our relationships. So I'm going to lay out 3 super practical principles for you and what we're going to read to help us guard our relationships. We need to build relationships with the right people. We need to build relationships that are real, and we need to build relationships with people who build us up. Okay, so those are going to be the 3 principles. We'll take them one at a time after we read. But let's start in Proverbs 27. I'm going to start in verse 2, and I'm just going to skip through. So try to follow along with the ones. I just picked out the ones that were the most relevant, though we could read the whole thing. They're already confusing enough as they are, okay? So let's not make it any more confusing. Let's just read the ones that are the most relevant for us. We're going to start in verse 2. This is what it says. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth. A stranger and not your own lips. So in other words, don't brag on yourself, right? A stone is heavy and sand a burden, but aggravation from a fool outweighs them both. Fury is cruel and anger a flood, but who can withstand jealousy? Better an open reprimand than concealed love. The wounds of a friend are trustworthy, but the kisses of an enemy are excessive. A person who is full of I need to read the words on the page. A person who is full tramples on a honeycomb, but to a hungry person, any bitter thing is sweet. Verse 9, we're going to skip to. Oil and incense bring joy to the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than self-counsel. Don't abandon your friend or your father's friend, and don't go to your brother's house in your time of calamity. Better a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Verse 14. If one blesses his neighbor with a loud voice early in the morning, it'll be counted as a curse to him. We all know what that's like. An endless dripping on a rainy day and a nagging wife are alike. Okay. Well, I'll comment on that, but not in the way you think. Okay, so we'll come back to that later. The one who controls her controls the wind and grasps oil with his right hand. In other words, it's not possible. Okay. Verse 17, iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens another. Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and whoever looks after his master will be honored. As water reflects the face, so the heart reflects the person. And then verse 23 and 24. Know well the condition of your flock, and pay attention to your herds. For wealth is not forever, not even a crown lasts for all time. Now, there's a lot here. I know that Proverbs can be confusing when you read them like that all together, maybe a little out of context. Remember, this is the king talking to his son or sons. So this is wisdom from leaders who've come before. And there's several relevant things here for guarding our relationships. Starting with the last couple of verses, know the condition of your flock, pay attention to your herds. Okay, that means pay attention to the people that you're around. Pay attention to your people. Pay attention to who your people are. Who are the ones that you're responsible for? Who are the ones that are responsible for you? Now, this is kind of really from a leader. It's taken from like a leader's perspective, but I think it's just good wisdom for anybody. So let's write down the first principle that we have for today. Build relationships with the right people. That's what he's saying. Know your people. Who are you letting into your life to be the closest to you? Who are your most trusted relationships? Are they real relationships? Can you be vulnerable? Can you count on these people to build you up and rather than tear you down? You need to find the right people who are your people, your herd, your flock, your tribe, because these are the people who influence you the most. They just are. So we often try to change ourselves in our lives. We try to change our habits. We try to grow in certain ways, have self-discipline. And while that's certainly not a bad thing, and self-control is one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit in your life, it's often the people that we're around that make the most difference. We need to know who our people are. Who are the ones influencing us to be the way that we are? Maybe you haven't been able to grow in your faith, or you haven't been able to change some of the things in your life that you want to change. You know you need to change because you've just been around all the wrong people. Maybe you haven't had the right people influencing you. My wife, Tamra, she said that a few years ago when we were back in Greensboro, she followed some people on Instagram, and she would every once in a while see like these parenting Instagram accounts and all that kind of. I'm sure you guys know about all this. I'm not on social media, okay? So not that I'm better than anybody else, but anyway, not on social media. So she was telling me about this, and she said that a few years ago she had recommended this one parenting Instagram account to some of her friends, and she was like, every once in a while, they got some good stuff. I'm going to start following them. I recommended it to two of my friends who just became moms. They had babies. And she said that, as the weeks went on, every once in a while, there would be a good, wise saying or something like that, good things to say. And then all of a sudden, she said she heard one that they started talking about manifesting some things into existence. And then they started talking about, rubbing the crystals together and doing all these different things. And she was like, oh boy, okay, I've stumbled into something that's not good here. This is like new age spiritualism, paganism type of thing. She quickly texts her two friends like, hey, that thing that I said would be wise and good? Don't follow that anymore, okay? That's their advice may or may not be pagan, okay? So that's not a good thing to let influence you in your parenting, right? See, we do this sometimes. We let the wrong things influence us. We let the wrong people influence us. We need to guard ourselves against that. We need to pay attention. We want you to know how to plug into our church here so that you can let people here influence you. That's why we have Starting Point, as Rich mentioned. We're always trying to change things and make them better. So hopefully in August, we're actually going to change it to 2 hours and do all of our Starting Point on one day. But we're going to provide lunch and childcare for you right after church on August 11th. So if you want to get around people who you know should be influencing you to be more like Christ, then you can do that here. You can get involved in Starting Point. We want to make it easy for you to know whether we're going to be your people or not. That's why we do it. Because you're looking for your people, the people that can influence you. So we're going to try to cram as much information in that 2 hours as we can to let you know who we are so you can make an informed decision about whether you want us to be your people or not. I say this all the time and I mean it. We're a church for anyone because we do want to show hospitality. We want to build anybody up and send them out who comes in here. So we're a church for anybody. But we're not the church for everybody. And you know what? That's okay, right? Not every church is for everyone, and that's okay. But if you want to find your place here, then we want you to be here. We want to make that easy for you. You need to find the right people to build relationships with who can help you grow in your faith, and help you be more like Jesus, and help you live on mission and on purpose the way that he calls us to. What does it look like for you to actually be a Christian? Well, you learn that in the church. You learn that in a place like this that has people who can build you up and send you out. And notice the implication throughout these Proverbs that the relationships that you make are by choice, right? That's why we want to help you make a choice here, whether you choose to be here and plug into our church or not. Well, that's because our relationships are our choice. So you can write this down as well. You choose who's going to influence you the most. I know, I love making Captain Obvious type of, points. I feel like I do this every week. But maybe we just need to be reminded of these things, right? You choose who you're going to let influence you. You don't just fall into it. You choose that by virtue of who you're going to be around. So choose wisely. Don't choose poorly. Choose wisely. Makes me think of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? He's trying to search for the cup. Some of the older folks know this. Some of you younger kids who've never watched those don't know it. right? You don't want to be the guy where the knight says he chose poorly, right? You don't want to do that. You want to be the guy that chose wisely, Indiana Jones, right? So choose wisely. Find the people who can help make you into the person you want to be. We all know that we need to be better than we are, right? We all have things that we want to change about us, and we seem to not be able to get any traction sometimes. Be around the people that you want to become like. Find those people. What does that look like for you? You choose. The reality is you can't escape the orbit of the people that are around you. It's like gravity. They just suck you in. They change how you are. If you're around somebody long enough, their traits will stick. So the extreme version of that is married couples. I think I've mentioned this before, but I find it fascinating. You know, over time, they've done research studies that show that married couples, the longer they're together, the more they look alike physically. Like, that's a little weird, right? But it's not just out there. I mean, they've done research. The article that I read mentioned this research study that collected newlywed photos and compared them to photos newlywed and then 25 years after they'd been married, you know, for 25 years or longer. And they did this, I don't know how they did, they did some kind of, you know, study to show how they had grown in their physical traits in similarity over time. It's kind of weird. They called it empathic mimicry. Over time, you become like the people that you're around. And in this case, it's almost like you even become like physically, like you start to look like them and have the same mannerisms and all of these different things. Time with another person can literally change the way you look. That's kind of crazy. So in the context of the Christian community, you need to find the people who can help you look more like Jesus. Those are the people you need to find. You need to get around those people. Guard those relationships. And we might face two big issues in attempting to do that. Either you find the wrong kind of people, or you do find the right kind of people, but then the problem in the 21st century is called mobility, and they move away or you move away. And so you're not able to cultivate those relationships as deeply as you need to or ought to. Yeah, and that's something to really consider, I think. You know, if you're an American Christian and you want to move away for a career, for school, or something like that, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong at all, right? We've talked about this. It starts with the morality foundation, and then there's lots of decisions that we make outside of morality, but it may not be wise for you. You need to consider wisdom, right? You might need to be around. If you've made relationships that you need to be around, you need to be around them then, because they're going to help you look more like Jesus. And looking more like Jesus over time is way more important than you making a little extra money. So I don't know. That's something certainly to consider. But also, I think that you can get around the wrong kind of people. And that is something that you need to be aware of. Because these are the people that will say they want you to be better and be good and have the traits that you ought to, especially in a church context. If we just put it in this context, this is what I'm thinking of. You can be around Christians, quote, Christians, who say they want you to look more like Jesus, as long as they can define what that looks like for you. Okay? You see what I'm saying? I've had conversations with people like that. I know people like this. I've known these people for years. They take wisdom issues and they turn them into moral issues. When who you vote becomes a moral issue, yeah, you're in a bad spot. Whether or not you drink alcohol becomes a moral issue, we're in a dangerous place. How you do and don't do certain things in church a certain way, if that becomes a moral issue, we've gotten outside of the realm of wisdom. We've gotten into religiosity. We've gotten into a place of being a religious hypocrite. You don't want to be around those people. Those are not the kind of people that you want influencing you. These are religious people that care less about grace in you and more about making you appear a certain way or making themselves appear a certain way. I heard Pastor Derwin Gray, who's a pastor out of Charlotte, say it like this one time. He calls them butt Christians. Now, let me explain. I mean, let me sit there for a second and just think about it, but let me explain. He says, they'll say things like, yeah, sure, Jesus saves you by grace, but you've also got to do X, Y, or Z. Yeah, he saves you by grace, but you got to make sure that you're voting the right way this year. I mean, this is an election that is big, it's different than any other, blah, 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 right? Yeah, it's Jesus, but you got to make sure that you're not drinking alcohol ever. I mean, if you're an alcoholic, yeah, you don't want to do that, right? That's not wise because it leads to drunkenness. We know what the Bible says about drunkenness. That's sin. Drinking alcohol, man, you got to be careful here. Yeah, it's Jesus, but you can't cuss or chew or date girls who do. That's the old way to say it, you know. It's Jesus, but it's also something else. It's Jesus plus. It's Jesus and a rule you got to follow. And listen, I don't care how godly somebody like that looks. If they're adding anything to the grace of God in your life, then that's not a gospel that you want to follow, because that's not the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus has done everything necessary to save you, and you can't do one thing. Not one thing. Now, the grace will change you over time, right? It will make you look certain. But if you start to try to contrive that and cajole that in your own life, or you let somebody else try to contrive that or control that in your life, that's not the gospel, friends. That's not Christianity. That's Jesus, but something else. If you're around somebody like that long enough, it says it here in the Proverbs, it's like a nagging wife and a constant dripping on a rainy day. Just constantly there, nagging at you all the time. It's like trying to grab onto something with slicked up, oily hands, it says, or grasp the wind. You just can't stand it. It's a constant frustration. It's not going to help you look more like Jesus. It's going to help you be more bitter and sour over time, probably like those religious hypocrites are. Instead, find the people who give you more peace when you're around them. Where does that come from in a Christian? How can you know when you get around somebody who it just feels good to be around them? It's a comfort to you. They're going to help you be less judgmental of other people. They're going to help you be more loving and kind. They're going to remind you in moments that you've been shown grace and kindness, so show grace and kindness to others, right? They're going to help you center yourself on the gospel of grace. They're going to help you find your identity in what Jesus has done for you, not in what you should do for Jesus. That's what they're going to do. Those are the people you want to be around. They're going to help you look more like Jesus. So guard who you're letting influence you. But the second takeaway for today that builds on the first is that we should also build relationships that are real. And that's how you're going to know whether or not you found the right people. Another way to say this is guard against being fake. Guard against fakeness in a relationship. You can tell whether or not you found the right person to be around by how vulnerable and how real you can be with them. There's a level of trust and vulnerability that you feel like you can share with this person. That means you need to be real. It's a manipulation and it's fake when you have to brag on yourself to build yourself up. That's what verse 2 is talking about. Don't speak these things of yourself. That's bragging. You're putting on a mask. You're trying to put up a wall. It's an Instagram filter kind of culture. You're constantly having to make yourself look good so that you'll be accepted by other people. The thing about bragging is it almost always comes from a place of insecurity, right? You're insecure about who you are and where you're at in life. Somebody who brags on themselves feels like they have to put that mask up so that other people will love them and bring them in. And either you don't trust yourself because you feel terrible and you feel guilty and shameful, and that's why you put the mask up and you brag, or you don't trust the other people to bring you in. And you feel like you have to put that mask on for them so that they will accept you because you can get that from them. You need to be aware of that and guard yourself here. You can't trust people that you have to brag to in order to be brought in. And really, this kind of heart is, to use the old school Christian language, it's a fear of man rather than a fear of God. You just really care about what other people think more than you care about what God thinks. But what's the beginning of wisdom that we see here in Proverbs? Is it a fear of man? No, the beginning of wisdom is what? Fearing God, right? It's fearing God. So what you need in a relationship isn't contrived approval. It's not bragging. It's not, being fake. It's being real. You need authenticity. So you can write this down as well. You need to be yourself. You need to be able to be yourself. And I know, man, I've heard so many pastors misuse how they talk about these things because they always want to try to say, well, the culture says you got to be yourself, and so we got to say it a different way. You don't want to be yourself. Yourself is terrible. You're a sinful person. And we all know that's true, okay? I hope. If you're here and you're a believer, you already know that you're a sinful person. But you need to know who you can be yourself around because you're not going to be a perfect person, are you? You're going to be a sinner. You need people that you can trust to be yourself around, right? I mean, there are certain things God is going to change in you over time. There's no doubt. He says he's going to complete the good work that he started in you. That's what the grace of God looks like. He saved you. He is sanctifying you or making you more holy. He's making you more like Jesus over time. And it's not that he's not going to use other people. He will. But that's his job to change you. That's between you and him. What you need are people that can help you get there by sharing the grace of God with you they need to be able to accept you for who you are. I mean, he's made us who we are, has he not? We have personalities, idiosyncrasies that probably will never change. So we need people that don't get annoyed by us when we come to them. We need people who can help us. We need people who aren't just going to outright reject us because, we're a little awkward or we're a little frustrating or whatever the case might be, You need people who are going to accept you for who you are in that sense. This especially applies to you if you're a leader here in our church. I want you to hear this, leaders. Sometimes leaders feel like they have to put on a mask and be somebody who they're not. Sometimes you feel like you got to be holier than thou, right? Because you're a leader now. Have you ever met a leader who feels like they're always trying to convince you that you should follow their leadership? That's not good. Because they're just trying to convince you, well, I'm this, I'm that. Listen, that's not a leader you want to follow, okay? That's like a salesman. That's the bragging. That's somebody who's putting the mask on. Pastor Craig Groeschel always used to say this on his leadership podcast, be yourself. People would rather follow a leader who's always real than one who's always right. Listen, I can promise you that if there's anything that I might not be all the time, it's right. I'm not not all right all the time, okay? But I can promise you I will always try to be real with you. Always. Maybe even to a point where you don't like, I'm always try to be real. Because that's what builds trust in a relationship. That's how we can have a relationship with one another. We have to be able to be real. I'm not going to try to share with you something that I'm not. I'm not going to try to be something that I'm not to you guys. And so as leaders in our church, I hope that you guys will take that seriously as well for all the leaders in the room. We need to be real with one another. That's how we build trust. It says this in verse 9, oil and incense bring joy to the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than self-counsel. That's what realness brings. It brings that sense of sweetness, that sense of joy. It's like a breath of fresh air. It's like a beautiful scent in your nostrils, he's saying. You think about sweetness too at this time. They didn't just have sugar that they could dump into a cake, for example, to make it sweet, or cookies or whatever. You couldn't just make things sweet. You had to find sweetness. You had to discover it. It was like a delightful discovery, right? You discover it in honey. You discover it in fruit, something sweet like that. Well, that's what friendship like this is like. Relationships at this depth, the relationships that are real, it's like a surprising delight. Because you can just let your hair down with somebody and you can be real with them. You don't have to put on airs. You don't have to act like you're something you're not. You don't have to act like you're holier than you are. You can just be real with them. They can give you counsel. They can give you companionship. And that brings you joy because you can be yourself without rejection. So that's a real relationship. Third principle here, the last one that we'll cover, is that we should build relationships with people who build you up. They all build on one another. As you can see, you find the right people. You know they're the right people if you can be real with them. And you know they're the right people if you can see that they're building you up. If they build you up. So guard yourself against people who want to tear you down. That's what you need to guard against. You're guarding against people who want to constantly tear you down. You're trying to build relationships with people who want to build you up. What we should be looking for are relationships with people who are going to build us up in appropriate ways. Now, that's not giving us big heads. That's not flattery. Proverb actually talks about that, right? We don't want somebody that's going to say untrue things to us or that's going to say things to build themselves up and not us up. I mean, if you're around a fool, they're going to aggravate you like a heavy burden. And so that's what flattery becomes. That's what any of this becomes. But it says in verse 3, have you ever met somebody who's a burden to be around like that? They're a burden. It's heavy. It's like carrying sand. I mean, have you ever been around somebody who's a burden? Don't say their name, but you probably all have one name in your head, right? We all know these people. I call them soul suckers because they're just sucking the life out of you, And they're doing that because they're trying to build themselves up, not to build you up. They're trying to use you to help themselves, and you walk away from encounters with them feeling things like sad. You're just sad. Or you feel frustrated, man. Why am I so frustrated and irritable? Or you walk away with them maybe even fearful because of the things that they've said about you or to you. Maybe they've even talked down to you. They're certainly talking about you or somebody else or whatever the case is. These are people you don't want to be around. You can't trust people like that because they're going to turn around and do the same thing to you that they're doing to somebody else in front of you, right? You have to be able to be vulnerable with somebody in a real way. They have to be the right person. And the only way that you know that they're the right person and that you can be vulnerable with them is if they're willing to build you up, not to tear you down. If you see that they're for your good and they're for your encouragement, then it's going to be okay. You can tell this is the right person. You can't trust somebody who's angry or cruel or jealous, as verse 4 says, because that kind of person will tear down, and they'll tear others down, and they'll eventually tear themselves down. They're like a flood, it says. What's a flood do? Does it build up? No. Floods destroy. That's what they're like. So find people who build you up, even if they do have to say hard things. That's the thing here, right? Nobody's saying this is flattery, and they're only going to speak encouragement to you all the time without any negatives and pointing things out that you need to hear that are hard. No. What's it say in verse 6? Sometimes you need a rebuke. The wounds of a friend are trustworthy, but the kisses of an enemy are excessive. See, it's like a doctor. You give doctor permission to wound you, right? So that they can make you healthy, so that they can help you heal, ultimately. That's what it's like with a friend. You're building relationships with the right people that you can be vulnerable with, that you know are going to build you up, and you're giving them license to speak hard things. Sometimes they need to rebuke you for things in your life that you're not seeing correctly, right? We all need this, but it's because we know they have our good in mind. They're not trying to tear us down. They're trying to build us up. It's like verse 17 says, iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens another. Yeah, it's going to sting a little, right? That friction, that doesn't feel good sometimes, and yet we grow sharper in the end. We grow better for it. Proverbs 15 says, if you listen to constructive criticism, you'll be at home among the wise. Proverbs 12 says, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but one who hates correction is stupid. That's the translation, okay? That's what they said. I don't know. I love that. Anybody else feel stupid sometimes? Because we don't want correction, do we? No, but we're giving people that we trust permission to correct us when we need to be corrected. And maybe we won't agree with them all the time, but we know it's out of a place of love. The key is to know who the correction is coming from, because if they're not trustworthy, it's not a real person that you can be vulnerable with, then of course the criticism, the correction, the hard truth, even if it is true, it's likely meant to tear you down. It's not helpful at all. But if it's coming from a person you know is for your good, then it's wise to listen. It's stupid if you don't. The problem is sometimes we don't want to listen, do we? We are stupid sometimes. That's just our nature. We'll listen to the wrong people, or we'll put up the masks so that we can appear to be a certain way that we're not. We'll have relationships that are just on the surface level. We don't want to risk anything. Talking about these kinds of relationships might do two things for us. They might create a sense of longing in us, or they might create a sense of guilt and shame. They can give us longing, though, right? Because we realize we don't have very many relationships like this. We just don't have this many. We don't have deep relationships. Maybe our relationships aren't that healthy. We realize that we've been around the wrong people. We realize that we don't have these kinds of things, and we long for it. We want it badly. But second, it can bring the guilt and the shame because we know that we're not a good friend ourselves. We're not good in some of our relationships. We're not always grace-filled people. We're not always ready to build others up. We're not always willing to be vulnerable with them or let them be vulnerable to us. As a matter of fact, we might have hurt people before. And it's easier to just put the wall up and to put the mask up and to be religious and to put up rules and to put up all these fake things. It's easier to do that. And it's because we have a problem. Verse 19 kind of gets at it. It says, as water reflects the face, so the heart reflects the person. It's pretty clear that what's in our heart will come out in how we relate to other people. It does. And what we think about other people, how we speak to other people, how we relate. What's in our heart comes out. And I don't know about you, but I've seen what's in my heart come out a few times. And it's not real pretty sometimes, is it? Listen to some of the other proverbs throughout the book here that just describe maybe the problem that we have in our heart. Listen to see if any of these apply to your life. Proverbs 10 says, the one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. Proverbs 11 says, whoever shows contempt for his neighbor lacks sense, but a person with understanding keeps silent. Proverbs 17 says, whoever conceals an offense promotes love, but whoever gossips about it separates friends. Proverbs 24 says, don't gloat when your enemy falls, and don't let your heart rejoice when he stumbles, or the Lord will see, be displeased, and turn his wrath away from him, with the implication being he'll turn his wrath onto you instead. And then Proverbs 24 as well says, don't say, I'll do to him what he did to me. I'll repay the man for what he's done. Man, the problem is we've all done things in our relationships to show that we've hated others in these ways, right? We've done ugly and unkind things, have we not? We've shown contempt for people. We've run our mouths when we should have stayed silent. We've gossiped about offenses against us and gloated or even rejoiced over those people falling or stumbling before us. We've gossiped about these things in wrong ways. We've even, said things like, I hope that what he did to me befalls him as well. I'll do to him what he did to me. It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth kind of thing. I'll never forget watching a documentary series on Netflix a few years back. Maybe some of you guys have watched this, called The Devil Next Door. Very, very intriguing, very interesting. It's about this seemingly normal guy from Cleveland, Ohio that worked on a factory assembly line for the auto industry, being accused of being a Nazi death camp guard known as Ivan the Terrible. I mean, it's just a fascinating situation. The whole thing is that he came to America, got a job, and he's this old guy now, or he was at the time of this documentary when all these things went down. In 1986, he was taken over to Israel and put on trial there for being this Ivan the Terrible, potentially. And what wasn't so striking about the documentary series was like the whole, well, is he or isn't he? How can they tell? How can they not tell? However many years, 50 years later, or whatever it is. The thing that was intriguing to me was hearing the tragic testimony of the Jews who were survivors of the Holocaust and who felt like he was the guy at Treblinka, the Ivan the Terrible, in the concentration camp. And to hear what they said was so jarring and so disturbing. And it wasn't just their account of what he did to them. It's actually what they said that he deserved, because there was one guy on the stand that said, he's an animal. Don't treat him like a human. He's an animal. He needs to be killed. He needs to be destroyed. He's less than human. That's the very same thing that the Nazis did to him. He was doing to the one he said was a Nazi. That is just so, do we not all do that? That person who hurt me, I'm going to hurt them. That person who was evil to me, I'm going to be evil back to them. God is saying, that's evil, and his wrath may turn to us. We all do that. It stems from a deeper problem that we all have, and the problem isn't just with the relationships with other people. The problem is that we've broken our relationship with God. There's a problem. The problem is that we don't know God the way that we should. We don't submit to him the way that we should. We long for all these things in other people. We long for these kind of relationships, and then we do everything we can to sabotage them with our own wickedness because we're broken with God. We've rejected him. All these things that we want can be found in him if we would simply turn to him. Our sin, our selfishness, our hate separated us from God, the perfect God of the universe, and our priorities have gotten all mixed up in these relationships. We try to find love and acceptance from others when what we're really looking for is in a relationship with God. And the incredible and surprising thing is he knew that, and he stepped into human history to make our relationship with him possible. He knows we need that relationship with him, and he made it possible. And instead of resenting us or gossiping about us or rejecting us, cutting off the relationship, what's he do? He sends his own son into the world to make us relationally right with him. Listen to what 2 Corinthians 5 says. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sins so that we could be made right with God through Christ. What we're longing for can't be found in a human relationship. It can only be found with the relationship that we have in Jesus. The relationship with one who lived the perfect life in our place and then died the death that we deserve for rejecting God. He died in our place. But then he overcame death and rose from the dead so that one day we can raise from the dead with him and be with God in relationship forever. That's the Christian gospel. That's the good news. Jesus makes us relationally right with God. And when you begin to believe that and let that sink into your heart and apply to your life, and when you're willing to go to God on his terms, not your own, all the earthly relationships that you have will start to fall into place behind that. Now, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to, just happen like that. But you're going to start to have wise relationships. You're going to start to guard your relationships in better ways. You're going to start to be more godly and be with other godly people. It's just going to happen like that. Your relationships will eventually get healthier. That's what the Proverbs are teaching us. If we apply these things to our life, then generally they will be true. So we're going to stop getting so angry or resentful. And we're going to stop making it about us. in a relationship. We're going to stop, pushing people away. We're going to stop longing for acceptance and love from somebody so much that we're willing to do whatever it takes and put on the mask and brag or whatever it is. We might even set up healthy boundaries for people that we know are bad influences on us. We're going to start doing all of these things because our relationship with God has been fixed through Christ. And it's going to change us from the inside out because God gives us peace now. We don't have to long for it in somebody else. God gives us peace. We don't have to long for acceptance from somebody else. God's going to give us love. We don't have to grasp at the relationship because it's already been given to us like a gift. We have it if we're willing to receive it. We can begin to relate to others in wiser and healthier ways if we simply focus on our relationship with God above all else. And so you can write this down as our final point for today, a takeaway, application point if you want. Guard your relationship with God above all else. That's what you need to do. Because if you're right with God relationally, then it's going to change everything else about your life. When our vertical relationship is right, then our horizontal relationships are going to get better and better. You might have some unhealthy relationships right now because you're simply not close to God. Maybe you haven't been in church for a long time. I don't know what your story is. Maybe you don't spend time with God on a regular basis. Maybe you don't even understand. Maybe you've realized you don't fully understand the grace of God in your life. You need to get close to God so that He can help change you from the inside out. Maybe you've been in and out of church. Maybe you can't connect. Man, I'd say it's probably because you're looking for acceptance and love in all the wrong places. You need to start finding it in the right place first with God, and then let that order the rest of your life after that. See what God has done for you in the gospel. See what He's done in Jesus, and let Him bring you close to Himself. That's what He wants for you. And then it creates this ongoing cycle. If you do that, if you grow close to God and you focus on your relationship with Him, then you're going to want to be around other people who love God as well. And you're going to let them rub up against you and sharpen you. Iron sharpens iron. You're going to start getting around other people, and then it's going to fuel your love for God even more. And so it's like this ongoing cycle that occurs. If you focus on your relationship with God, then it's going to push you to other people who want to follow God. And then they're going to push you back to God again. And it's just going to keep going on. And that's why you need to plug into a church. Listen, if you've been around here and you haven't committed to our church yet, I'm not trying to brag, manipulate, or anything, but you need to get plugged in somewhere. You need to find your people. You need to find people you can be real with. You need to find people who are going to build you up in grace, not tear you down. You're going to need to do this in your life because it's going to change everything for you. And maybe the reason that you can't get any traction in your life, things won't change, whatever it is, it's because you're not around the right people. Get around the right people today. Guard your relationships this week, but start by guarding your relationship with God above all else. Let me pray. God, we need you today in this. Teach us what it looks like to follow you. Teach us what it looks like to relate to you better. Because of what Jesus has done, He's made it possible. God, help us to believe that today. Help us to believe the gospel. Help us to believe the good news that you've made us right with yourself. There's nothing we can do to make ourselves right with you. And you've done it all, and you brought us in by grace, and you change us by grace. Thank you, God, that you're so gracious. You're so patient. You're so faithful. You're not angry at us. You love us. And God, I pray that we would dispel that in our hearts and in our minds, that we have an angry God somehow looking down upon us. God, we know that you're not an angry God. You're a loving God. You're a gracious God. You sent Jesus into the world to die for us so that we could be right with you. God, I pray that we would guard our hearts against being bitter and angry and hating other people. I pray that, God, we would be guarding our hearts against being around the wrong people and letting the wrong people influence us. God, I pray for those people. I pray that you'll help them to grow and mature and come to know you. But Father, for us, help us to be wise in our relationships. And I pray that you'll do that in us today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much for listening with us today. We hope that it was an encouragement to you. But we don't see this as a replacement for gathering with other believers in a local church context. And so if you don't have a local church, we would encourage you to plug in with one wherever you are. And if you're in Roanoke, Virginia, we'd love to invite you to plug in with us here at Redemption Church. And you're welcome anytime to gather with us. But you can check us out online at our website, redemptionroanoke.com. You can look for other content or resources there. But thanks again for listening.